So, soft magic systems. Soft magic systems are where the magic is. This system might not be good because it can often be seen as. So, it really helps to think about how your magic works, what are the rules and limitations, is it learned or accessed through something, how the tension in the novel ends up feeling weak. And the magic undermines the plot instead of enhancing it. And that is the thing with soft magic. If you don't explain where it's coming from, but it solves everything in your book, it kind of feels like, okay, well, then there has to be something else about it, how it can do all of these things. And yeah, it takes out the tension and it undermines the plot, because then what stakes do you really have in your book? So one interesting thing you can kind of do is that the magic your characters are trying to use to get out of a problem does something help yourself with writing it, because you don't have to constantly think about like, oh, I can't really remember how this worked. So in that sense, having this vagueness is not the problem, but giving your characters. So the way I approach this is by pointing out like anomalies. So to give you an example, what I mean with that, we have to go where the grand wheelers fly, Jerry said, eager to get on with their quest. I could think of nothing to do but to try and put a shutting spell on the door. Okay, hello and welcome to the third video of this playlist. Today we're going to talk about the magic systems and how to write them in your fantasy book or novel or series or whatever. We already talked about the history and like the subgenres, so if you're interested in that, check those videos out first. And let's get started right away. So, what kind of magic systems are there? There are a lot, so let's get an overview of everything. So, when you're writing your book, a helpful strategy can be to decide the magic system first. So, choosing something you're excited about, but also something you feel like works with the ideas you have of the general plot, or just you have a certain scene in your head. And yeah, so let's talk about the different systems. Having a clear idea of how you want the magic to be, it can be easier to pick a system, definitely. So I mean, obviously this is fantasy, so you can kind of do whatever you want, but yeah, this video is just to guide you and to give you a little bit of an idea what's out there. Maybe you haven't considered a certain system yet, and this can help you to kind of get an understanding of what's out there and what maybe fits your system or your magic better. I'm currently writing like a huge fantasy story, and I'm building everything from the ground up because that's super fun for me to decide like every single detail, and I can just make up my own rules. And yeah, I kind of like to have everything figured out so I can feel secure when I'm writing. And I want my writing to be as smooth as possible. And if I have just figured out everything already, it makes writing for me so much more fun, because I can just like let it all go and like get into an automated writing space, you know? But like everyone is different. But everyone is also different, and maybe you're like a person who's too over perfectionistic and then just won't start at all. So maybe if you know that you're that kind of person, it's better for you, or if you're just comfortable enough to just start and then like write out inconsistencies throughout your stories, then yeah, definitely do that. You also don't have to tie yourself to magic systems. No one will put you on a wanted wall for writing higher fantasy, but then there are some elements that are actually a different magic system. So it really helps to think about how your magic works, what are the rules and limitations, is it learned or accessed through something, how does magic influence the story, how does it affect your character development and interactions, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, how can it enhance or detract from the stories. There are a lot of different questions. There are also a lot of really great like Pinterest posts, tweet posts, and other blog articles on kind of the questions you should ask yourself. But I will definitely get into a few questions that can help you within the different magic systems. So in this video, we're going to talk about soft magic systems, hard magic systems, elemental magic, divine or deity-based magic, ritual magic, and techno magic. There are a shit ton of magic systems out there, so don't be mad if I missed one. If you want me to do another video on it, I can definitely do it. But these were kind of the main ones, and the other ones are really like specific, where I can highly recommend just reading a little bit on your own. But I wanted to cover like the basics. So, soft magic systems. Soft magic systems are where the magic is loosely defined with few or no explanations of the rules or limitations, which makes it more mysterious and enchanting. So a positive side of that is that you have much more freedom, especially if you are unsure about the future of your story and where your characters are kind of going and how magic should work for them. It's also good because you don't have to create an entirely new system or an entirely new world with a lot of rules that may be complicated, and yeah, it's just a lot of work, and this way you can just focus more on the story and like the magic of it. This system might not be good because it can often be seen as too powerful if there are no limitations, no clear limitations, which often makes the journey of your characters easier, and the readers feel like everything is too overpowered, everything is too easy. And even in magic systems, there are certain like illogical things that are kind of annoying, especially if you're taken out of the immersion of reading. And another contra is that it kind of can lead to plot holes and inconsistencies. So these are kind of the things that people don't really like about soft magic systems. But again, it's not the lack of explanations that is the annoying part. It's the annoying part of kind of inconsistencies, of things being too overpowered. So keeping those in mind can be really good. It's not too complicated to write it, but you definitely should do some work in making sure that well depicted and consistent and stays immersive. And it might be more complicated for some people, it might be less complicated for other people, but yeah, if you want to write a soft magic system, do it. But also, there are ways to avoid this. This is why we're here, to help you make sure that you can write it in a good way. And yeah, I also don't like to say like, oh, soft magic system might not be for you because it's too complicated to make it in a good way. Like, no, it's just about having to understand like what readers like, what readers don't like, what are maybe some tips on how to do it in a good way, because obviously you also want your book to be good, right? So how do we create one? Let's talk a little bit about guidelines and best practices. And I just wanted to quote Brandon Sanderson from his website. He talked about soft magic systems. He's also a fantasy writer. You've probably seen some books of him. I've also read some and I really like them. And he wrote, quote, "The really good writers of soft magic systems very, very rarely use their magic to solve problems in their books. Magic creates problems, and then people solve those problems on their own without much magic." And I definitely agree with this approach because when problems get solved by a random magical object appearing like luckily, and then they can use it and it solves the entire problem, it kind of makes your story really boring or unsuspenseful. So I think a very good approach is to look at all the problems you're creating in your stories, like all the things they have to overcome, and then look at how you solve that problem. And if the main part of the solution is kind of magic, but it's kind of like used as an excuse, like, oh, well, magic solved it, then maybe try to find a way where the characters find a different solution to the problem, where magic is more like the side character or like not the primary solution solver. And to add to the whole soft magic system, he also said we don't know what it can do, and so if the writer uses it to solve a lot of problems, then the tension in the novel ends up feeling weak, and the magic undermines the plot instead of enhancing it. And that is the thing with soft magic. If you don't explain where it's coming from, but it solves everything in your book, it kind of feels like, okay, well, then there has to be something else about it, how it can do all of these things. And yeah, it takes out the tension and it undermines the plot, because then what stakes do you really have in your book when the readers are halfway through and they're like, well, they're going to solve it through magic anyways. I think a good example, it's a little disputable, but a good example is Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, or just in general, like the Hobbit Rings series, because Gandalf's powers, or like in general, the magic is not really explained. Like, we don't really know where it's coming from, the extensions or limitations of it, and it really adds like mystique to the entire world, and it adds mystique to the character of Gandalf, and throughout the journey and the adventures, they face a lot of problems, which they also solve through different things, different than magic. Or one example you can look at where soft magic systems weren't really that well introduced. When I'm saying these bad examples, it doesn't mean I'm not hating on any authors, on any books. It's just to give you a look on how to implement it in the right way. Also, sometimes if you're writing your first book, you can't do everything perfect. So I can't really look at like old authors and their first works and be like, well, you kind of did that like in a shitty way. So this is just to give you examples on understanding what's kind of a good implementation and what implementations could be better. And I wanted to talk about Aragon, which was written by Christopher Poloni, who also was a teenager when he wrote it. Just want to add that. But so like early on, the magic system feels kind of inconsistent, with spells and powers appearing without clear rules, which confuse a lot of readers. This is also called Deus Ex Machina, by the way, which is a time in the story that seems unsolvable, but then through the sudden appearance of like a stranger, an object, or some information, the problem gets resolved through wonders, which we already talked about. So your readers kind of felt that there was inconsistencies in the magic systems. So yeah, that's again where it can be kind of helpful to do some thinking before you write your book on how you want to avoid these inconsistencies. So one interesting thing you can kind of do is that the magic your characters are trying to use to get out of a problem does something unexpected, because that is the advantage of soft magic systems. It's not explained, which also means it's more unpredictable. Things being unpredictable in books is a great thing, so use that to your advantage and make the magic do something unexpected. Make the magic make things even worse for them, like they're trying to use magic as a way to solve something, but then it does something unexpected, because maybe the characters also don't understand how magic works, which creates even more tension and suspense. Try using magic for more the ambience and the visuals, like the animals, the flora and fauna. So try to define some rules and some limitations. They can be also really broad, and you don't even have to reveal them to the readers to keep the mystique of the magic, but it can really help yourself with writing it, because you don't have to constantly think about like, oh, I can't really remember how this worked. The more your magic is used in your book, the more your readers will want to know about it, and the less it is this like ominous force that is unexpected and immersive. So I could recommend finding these kinds of rules and limitations after you maybe like wrote down the scenes you have in your mind where magic plays a role. Like when you think about something a character does, like why did they choose that specific magic instead of something else? So there already is some kind of limitation there somewhere that causes them to have to like go around it and find a loophole. Like for example, if you have one problem where they use a certain magic spell or something, and then the next time a similar problem arises but they use a different spell, it's like, okay, why did they use that spell instead? And then you can kind of find these conclusions in these scenes already, where like, okay, well, there has to be some kind of limitation why the character cannot use this right now, and has to find a loophole and use it in some different way. So looking at these things in a little bit more detail, you can conclude a lot about your magic already. And again, you don't have to reveal it to your readers, but it can be really nice to have that for yourself and for staying consistent with your magic. And what I also sometimes do is that I kind of imagine myself being like in a convention, and having like a room of people asking me questions. And then I kind of imagine myself, okay, if someone would now ask me, why did character A did B, when literally solution Z is like the most obvious thing to do? And if your answer would be like, well, it was more exciting that way, then maybe you should find like something else to explain it, or a different reason for why they didn't do A, but B instead. And I think often the dislike towards soft magic system, if you look at Reddit posts or forums or reviews on a certain book, comes down to writing. So don't be discouraged to write soft fantasy. There are a lot of people that like reading soft fantasy. I also like reading soft fantasy. And as long as it is included nicely in your world and as long as you write it good. So in that sense, having this vagueness is not the problem. But giving your characters like vague abilities, that's usually where it takes the fun out of it, because it's like, and not having these sort of like limitations, or you don't really know what your character can or cannot do with the magic, and that, yeah, this creates really these circumstances where magic is just used to get out of a situation. My first tip, which is what I also do, write down all of your ideas you have, all of the scenes, all of the characters, all of your plots. Like, try to draw out as much information out of these things as you can, and try to conclude rules and limitations and the extent of things, and then write these clear things out and keep like a consistency posted. So whenever there's kind of magic happening in your story, you can check this consistency posted at the end of your writing session, for example, and to see like, oh, does this make sense, or does it not make sense? And try not to overthink it. That's a good part of this soft magic system, but also try to think, okay, is this too inconsistent, so it would take me out of the immersion? Secondly, you can ask a third person to read it and ask them where or at what points they are pulled out of the immersion or pulled out of the story, because they're like, huh, what? So, okay, you have now created your world with fantasy animals, with your characters, with like weird transportations, with spells and fantasy cities. And then you write it like everyone knows this world. If you write a book that is happening in our current world, you wouldn't probably spend 2 pages describing the complexity of a car or how they use it. No, you would just write, okay, they drove to the store. And it's kind of the same with the fantasy world. Like, focus on your plot and the rest happens in the background. Like, if you see a pigeon, you've probably seen a million of pigeons. You wouldn't be like, oh my god, like, and then I stared at the pigeon and blah, 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 like, describe it in, like, depth. No. And it's the same in your fantasy world. If there's an animal that they always see, they're probably just going to say, like, oh, a star sparrow just flew by or something. But I definitely get this. Like, you've created something really cool and you really, really, really want your readers to know about it, and you want your readers to know about how cool it is. But your readers don't want to read an entire page of description of a certain bird and their abilities if it literally has no influence on your plot. So whenever this happens, I like to think in this way. So how can I include a description so that it makes sense to the reader, so it isn't overwhelming or distracting? How can I keep it short without using a bunch of terms where readers get more like, what are you talking about? Like, what term is this? What term is this? So the way I approach this is by pointing out like anomalies, describing the usual status, and then describe the status that is like current, that is more interesting or unique or like out of place. So to give you an example, What I mean with that, for example, let's say you're describing like a really cool transportation thing. Make them drive in one that is broken or that has something broken. So your character is like looking forward to a smooth ride home after, I don't know, like sword practice, and she enters the cabin and sinks in the soft pillows. She held her watch against the button to link her address and leaned back, closing her eyes. Again, linking her address, random thing she does every day. It doesn't need more explanation. You don't need to know how the technology works. You don't need to know that this is the way it is in this world. It's completely normal. So she held her watch against the button to link her address and leaned back, closing her eyes. The cabin moved and sped up. Suddenly her head banged against the wall, making her open her eyes again. She should have been able to prop up her gold coins without them falling over. So she leaned forward to ask the driver what's going on. The driver responds, "Oh, sorry, my amulet needs replacing." Rolling her eyes, she sank back in her seat with an exhale. She turned around to look outside the back window. Instead of the usual purple cloud that emanated, it looked like a mixture of green and purple. That was it with her smooth ride. So this is kind of a situation you created where you can explain how usually a ride would take place. So usually she could have put her coins up like in these trains in Japan where you can like put your coins up and nothing moves because it's so soft. But it's not this time. Like, it's not happening this time. And how this is annoying because now it's broken and now it's like this. It also gave you now the opportunity to be like, okay, instead of like the usual purple cloud, which would indicate some kind of like magic that would usually, I don't know, like be emanated from the transportation thing, but instead of this, like a greeny thing is coming out. It's a short example, but this kind of allows you to describe the things you're really proud of for inventing, and you're like, I want my reader to be just as excited about this, but they are way more excited if it is naturally incorporated. And yeah, by like pointing out these like anomalies, it can really help to do that thing. And one thing I also want to say about this is that it is okay to spread these things over your entire story. Like, you don't have to explain everything in your first pages. If it is more complicated and there are certain things your readers absolutely have to understand, then write these things down and come up with scenes in like the first chapter and the first 2 chapters for them to understand it. And also, readers, don't assume readers are like stupid. If I read something in chapter 3, I can make the connection myself to be like, oh, that is what happened in the first sentence. It's okay to spread it out unless there's something they really need to know, and it will just create confusion for them to read on. Another example I wanted to do for animals, for example, they looked over the green fields that seemed to have an infinite horizon. Wow, Gary mouthed. You can see everything from up here. He was amazed, slowly turning around to look at every direction. We have to go where the grand wheelers fly, Jerry said, eager to get on with their quest. Can I see the drawing again? Jerry fumbled in his cloak and pulled out the leather worn-out booklet. He turned towards the thread, and together they hunched over to look at the drawing again. Then you can kind of describe how do they actually look like, and maybe like suddenly a shadow laid their drawing into darkness and they turned around and they didn't need to look at their drawing twice to know that that was a grand wheeler. And this way you can kind of incorporate it in a natural way, like, oh no, my character suddenly forgot the bird they need to look for. And this way you can include these kind of things. The same with like cities, maybe something is broken, but usually it's not broken, and then you can describe that. I want to give you a few recommendations on what you can read to kind of like get a better sense of it. Actually, like, reading is the best way to kind of write, and I never really understood that, but it kind of makes sense because for me writing fantasy is really easy because throughout my life I've read mostly fantasy, so I already know a lot about it. So reading soft magic systems can kind of help you to get a better feeling for it. And I can recommend Lord of the Rings. I know there are a lot of people that are like, oh well, but there's this and this and this, but it's my personal recommendation. So I wanted to include a few quotes from the book where magic is kind of mentioned for you to see how Tolkien handles the talking about magic, because for me personally, it kind of helps to see certain quotes from books to understand how people or how different authors describe magic, or how they are not over describing it, because sometimes I feel like, oh, I always have to describe everything in a lot of deep detail, and then I read some books about it and it's like a super easy, nonchalant way of describing it, because that's also how you read over a lot of stuff, so you don't need to over explain every time. So here are a few quotes. Are these magic cloaks? Asked Pippin, looking at them with wonder. I do not know what you mean by that, answered the leader of the elves. They are fair garments, and the web is good, for it was made in this land. They are elvish robes, certainly, if that is what you mean. Leaf and branch, water and stone. They have the hue and beauty of all of these things, under the twilight of Lorien that we love. For we put the thought of all that we love into all that we can make. Yet they are garments, not armor, and they will not turn shaft or blade. But they should serve you well. They are light to wear and warm enough or cool enough at need, and you will find them a great aid in keeping out of the sight of unfriendly eyes, whether you walk among the stones or the trees. You are indeed high in the favor of the lady, for she herself and her maidens wove the stuff, and never before have we clad strangers in the garb of our own people. So it is really vague, and that is what I mean. He doesn't explain how anything works, but we can still see the magic in it. Like, oh, it will be warm enough if you need it. It will be cold enough if you need it. And it will kind of keep you out of the sight of unfriendly eyes. So we're like, okay, there's kind of magic to it, but also he doesn't really make it out to be this magical. Like, he's like, oh, it's not really that deep, like it's just has been woven by the lady, blah blah. And this is what I mean with the people that live in the magic world. They have always lived there, so everything is more natural to them and doesn't have to be over explained. Here's another quote from the book. Gimli took his arm and helped him down to a seat on the step. What happened up at the door? He asked. Did you meet the beater of the drums? I do not know, answered Gandalf, but I found myself suddenly faced up something that I have not met before. I could think of nothing to do but to try and put a shutting spell on the door. I know many, but to do things of that kind rightly requires time, and even then the door can be broken by strength. So we can here see, he also says like there are a lot of spells for that, but also it takes time for it, so we have some explanation. But then he says, oh, like even that door could be broken by strength, so we're also not really giving like a limitation. And he also doesn't really over explain how he did the spell. He's just like, I put on a shutting spell on the door, boom, done, ready. You don't really question it. You're like, okay, it's a shutting spell, I'll accept it. Another quote is, then something came into the chamber. I felt it through the door, and the orcs themselves were afraid and fell silent. It laid hold of the iron ring, and then it perceived me and my spell. What it was, I cannot guess, but I have never felt such a challenge. The counterspell was terrible. It nearly broke me. For an instant the door left my control and began to open. I had to speak a word of command. That proved too great a strand. The door busted into pieces. And here again, like, he's just, the counterspell was terrible. What counterspell? How did it work? How did it look like? We don't get an explanation, but it's like, okay, it was just a counterspell. And also the quote, and then it perceived me and my spell. No explanation on, oh yeah, then I felt a weird tingling in my body as I felt like I was being scanned, blah, blah, blah. No, it's just, and then it perceived me and my spell. Boom, done. Explanation ready. Another quote is, much evil must befall a country before it wholly forgets the elves, if once they dwelled here. And I also really like this this quote because it's also very vague. Like, yeah, and these quotes were from the Fellowship of the Ring, being the first part of the Lord of the Rings. So if you're interested in reading that, go check it out. As for what readers recommend for reading soft magic systems, I found a lot of agreements on reading the Discworld by Terry, and readers say that his magic has something of like a personality and it isn't easy to control and can simply decide to do things on its own. I also read the first book of the Discworld, and I also really like those books and they're fun to read. And yeah, this is how this is kind of going to go. I'm going to present you like the magic system, a short description what it is, on what is a pro and contra, how to write it, and then lastly I give my personal recommendation and then a reader's recommendation. and that was soft magic systems. So if you have any more questions on this, please write it in the comments. I can maybe do like follow-up videos on that, or actually make like a writing session where we kind of try to figure out things together. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of these kind of videos, especially in this playlist, and you don't want to miss out on anything, give me a follow, like this video, or just leave a comment. And yeah, I'm really excited for the next magic systems. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking your time to watch these videos, and then see you next time. What time is it? It's Christmas time. I am so ready for autumn and Christmas and the cold weather, and it's so stormy outside, it's so windy outside, it's really cold, it's rainy. It's my favorite weather, and I thought about, I'm not the biggest candle person, but it's a little bit of ambience. I don't even know if you can see it. Well, let me put it here, okay? A fucking amazing, just love it, just love it.